All right, picture this. You get dropped in the middle of nowhere with a handful of strangers. The goal? Outlast the other team and walk away with $500,000. This was the wild setup for a survival game that pitted 5 men against 5 women. Now, on the surface, you'd think it's all about brute strength and endurance. But as we're about to see, it was so much more than that. Right out of the gate, day one, the men's team was, well, they were pretty sure they had it in the bag. To them, this was a physical challenge, a battle they were just built to win. And honestly, that mindset pretty much defined their entire game from start to finish. And that's really the core of this whole thing. Because what happened over the next 67 days wasn't just a test of who could survive the longest. Nope. It turned into a masterclass in psychology, in managing resources, and in the incredibly tough art of making a sacrifice for the team. To really get why one team won so decisively, you've got to look at the rules. Because the creator, MrBeast, threw in this one massive twist that completely flipped the script. It turned a simple survival challenge into a super complex strategic puzzle. This right here, this one rule changed everything. Think about it. All of a sudden, it's not about just you surviving. You could tap out on day 2, and if the last person on your team made it to the end, you'd still get $100,000. Quitting wasn't just giving up. It became a strategic move to save food for your strongest players. And because you had no idea how many people the other team had left, it was a total mind game. So faced with this twist, the two teams, they went in completely opposite directions. It was like night and day, a fundamental split in how they thought about the game, and it started on day 1 and basically sealed their fates right then and there. I mean, you can see the difference right away. Team women started playing the long game from the jump. They were rationing food, they built a solid waterproof shelter, they were a unit. Team men, on the other hand, had this whole we'll figure it out later vibe. Their shelter was flimsy, they didn't ration any food, and their team dynamic, yeah, that fell apart fast. And listen to this. This is a quote from the women's camp just a few days in. They totally understood the assignment. They knew they weren't there for a fun camping trip. They were there to win a ton of money. And they figured out that the smartest way to do that was to strategically send some of their own people home to save their most precious resource, the food.
By just day 4, the difference was incredible. The men were already at each other's throats, forming little cliques, and accusing guys of being lazy. Meanwhile, over at the women's camp, they'd already set up roles, calling their survival experts mommies, and working together to help them out. One camp had teamwork, the other had pure resentment.
And these different approaches weren't just talk. No, they had immediate, real-world effects that just started to snowball as the days got tougher and the pressure started to build. See, the men's team didn't have strategic eliminations. They had a total collapse. One after another, guys left, not as a strategic play, but because they were just broken. Exhaustion, feeling defeated, and a shelter that was so bad it couldn't even keep the rain out. This was the direct price they paid for not planning ahead. And then everything came to a head on day 20. There was a challenge that was just the perfect snapshot of the two different mindsets. The prize was a huge, waterproof tent. But here's the catch. To get it, one player had to sacrifice themselves and go home. The choice was simple, but the answers were worlds apart. For the women, Julia didn't even hesitate. She took the deal, sacrificing herself so her last remaining teammate, Phaedra, would get the single most valuable thing for long-term survival, a dry place to sleep. TJ, for the men, said no. He chose to keep his teammate in the game over getting a proper shelter. And you know what? The regret hit them almost instantly. His teammate, Patrick, knew it was a huge mistake. They chose a buddy for the short term over a tool for long-term survival. So now they had 2 guys, but a terrible shelter. Phaedra was all alone, but she was living in a fortress. So eventually, the men's team was down to just 1 guy, and the whole game changed. It became Phaedra versus TJ, a one-on-one duel where every single decision their teams had made for the past 50 days was about to pay off or come back to haunt them. Because of all that early rationing and the smart sacrifices, Phaedra had a massive leg up. She went into this final showdown with a huge pile of food. TJ, on the other hand, whose team never saved anything, was basically running on empty. He had to go out hunting every single day, burning precious energy, while Phaedra was just chilling with a fully stocked pantry. And this challenge perfectly sums up the entire game. They both get a chocolate bar. Phaedra, who has plenty of food, just eats hers, finds a hidden message inside, and wins even more food. TJ, who's desperate, tries to ration his tiny chocolate bar so strictly that by the time he finally finds the message, days later, the prize is long gone. His own attempt to save resources completely backfired. The last strategic mistake came on day 60. They got to negotiate for one item each. If they both said yes to the other's request, they'd both get their item. Phaedra, who was doing fine but probably bored out of her mind, asked for an art kit. TJ, totally out of food and desperate, asked for a private chef for a whole week. I mean, why would she ever agree to that? Phaedra had zero reason to approve such a game-changing advantage for him. So she said no. TJ just got way too greedy, and it cost him the entire game. His food was gone, there was no more coming, and that was it. It was over. So after all that, what was the real difference maker? Why did one strategy lead to a blowout victory and the other to a complete and total flameout? For 67 incredibly tough days, these two philosophies were tested. And when you look back, the game wasn't really decided on day 67. It was decided way back on day 1, with those very first choices each team made. In the end, the women's team won because they were playing chess while the men were playing checkers. They put the team goal way above any individual ego. They understood sacrifice was a weapon. They planned for the end game from the very beginning, and they made smart, calculated decisions instead of emotional, short-sighted ones. And then it was over. TJ finally quit, and Phaedra, still at her camp with no idea what was happening, was told she was the last one standing. Her team's strategy worked perfectly, and every single one of them became $100,000 richer. You know, this whole experiment leaves us with a really interesting question. The men focused on keeping as many strong individuals in the game as they could. The women focused on building a strong system to make sure at least one of them could cross the finish line. And in the end, the system won. Hands down.